All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Nutrition with Elena. Today, we are going to be learning about vitamins. So, Elena, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I did want to go over two questions that people had last month, and I'm not sure if they're on or not, but I forgot to email Erica about the answers. So somebody had asked about vitamin C with calcium, and vitamin C actually does enhance calcium. And then if they need to worry about iodine without a thyroid. And it seems like we don't have to prioritize iodine if we don't have a thyroid, but it doesn't hurt to include it in the diet. So I just wanted to touch on that. And then we'll get started with today. So today we're going to talk about vitamins and just kind of like dig a little deeper into, some info on specific vitamins, how to incorporate them into our diets. First things first, I wanted to get one of our recipes started. So this is the black lentils with spinach. I wanted to show you black lentils. They're also known as beluga lentils, but you can see, and they're called beluga lentils because they kind of look like caviar a little bit, right? I like the fact that they hold their shape once they're cooked. So, it's similar to green lentils, like they mostly hold their shape. I feel like these hold the shape a little bit better. And I already made up our black lentils that we're going to add to this mixture today. So first, what I'm going to get started with is our onions. So we're going to thinly slice an onion. And then we're just going to work on getting the onions to caramelize. This recipe is so good. As you can see, I did adapt it from a website that I do like, Alexandra Cooks. Just because I really wanted to find something that incorporated in one of our leafy greens, because we're going to talk about those today. And I also wanted to incorporate in these black lentils just because I've just been enjoying them lately. And this recipe I ended up like snacking on it. It was just so tasty. So I'm excited to have it back in the fridge. Now on her website, she does serve it with like a Greek yogurt mix. And I did try it with that and it was fine, but I liked it good by itself. So I didn't incorporate that as part of the recipe. But just knowing you could do, something like that with it. And then you can eat it by itself or maybe like serve it with pita or something like that. Or flatbread. Or a type of, some type of whole grain. I'm just thinly slicing this onion. Just another way to incorporate in some legumes into your diet. These lentils, sometimes people don't love like a full bean. So I like to work on people having some lentils if they're not a big bean person, because it's just a different mouth feel. You're not biting in to an actual bean. You're just having, oh boy, that's a little bit too hot for this no Bennett situation. See how it goes when I add my onions. All right. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do is actually cover this. We're just going to let it saute, and then the water that kind of condenses up will drip back down and provide it with a little bit of moisture. Great. I'm going to let that go for a little while. Slow it down. And we're just gonna let them get caramelized. So they're gonna get that nice deep color. While they're going, I am going to prep, just get that balsamic vinegar ready to go in once those lentils are caramelized. So we're gonna do a 1/4 cup of balsamic vinegar. And this really, along with the onions being caramelized, this really adds some sweetness to the recipe. I'm gonna have that ready to go. So for this recipe, we're gonna add in, once everything's cooked down, we're gonna add in a cup of cooked black lentils. I ended up making a full, so to get a cup of cooked, you need usually like a 1/2 cup of dry. I made a full cup. And what I'll do with kind of the leftovers, I just do a mix with other vegetables and just kind of have that as another option for a snack or even for a breakfast. Bean bowls can actually be a nice option. So we've talked about grain bowls in the past. Or maybe thinking about making a bean bowl that you're going to have a bean or a lentil as your base. So like the black lentils could be your base. You can add in some vegetables, maybe some nuts and seeds. So, maybe some pepitas or hemp hearts, something like that. And then you can add some type of like herbs, spices, and maybe some type of a seasoning. So I've made one that I put like a little bit of apple cider vinegar and olive oil on top of, with some hemp seeds, a little bit of ginger, and some vegetables like not Brussels sprouts, but like broccoli and mushrooms. It's a really nice blend. So kind of rethinking the bowl, right? We can use just beans if we wanted as a base. We're gonna let them go a little bit longer. While that's going, I am just gonna get started with my slides, and then we'll pop back to this and our other recipe in a bit. So let me share my screen. Great. So like I said, I'm going to talk about vitamins today. So we're going to cover what are vitamins, and then also talk about some vitamin highlights, talking about some specific ones. So vitamins are organic substances that we need to obtain from food in small amounts. So they're in our group of micronutrients, right? So we have our macro, which is our large nutrients, which are kind of our carbohydrates, fats, protein. And then we have our micro or smaller amount needed nutrients, which are vitamins and minerals. So these vitamins are important in a lot of our bodily functions. We have 2 different families. So we have our water soluble vitamins. They don't stay in the body at all. We don't accumulate them in our tissue or any other location in our body. So they need to be consumed regularly. So those are the B vitamins and vitamin C. And then we have our fat soluble vitamins. These can store in our fat cells, and they can stay in the body for days or even months. So we'll talk about water soluble vitamins first. So the B vitamins, so we have 8 B vitamins that we are aware of and need to consume regularly. So, some of the names might be familiar, but we have thiamine and riboflavin and niacin, pantothenic acid, pyridoxine, which we probably don't hear often, but I feel like B6 is something we kind of hear fairly often. Biotin, folate, again, we don't really hear B9, but we might hear folate or folic acid. And then B12 or cobalamin. So that is probably another one that we've heard of, vitamin B12. The B vitamins are needed for energy, metabolism, nerve system function, heart health, mood regulation, and each one has different functions in the body. I'm going to highlight a couple specific B vitamins. So folate is very important for our health. It's going to support our proper cell growth and division. Very specifically needed during adequate amounts during pregnancy, so that it does help prevent neural tube defects, heart health, important for that, and helps prevent certain types of anemia. So people that might be at risk for deficiency, if people have alcohol use disorder, women of childbearing age, and then pregnant women. So for the overall population, not a huge risk of not getting enough from our diets. It is fortified in, which can be a little controversial sometimes, but it is fortified in our grain, like processed grain products like breads and cereals and things like that. So we can see a variety of different ranges that are needed. But for adults, male and female, have the same amounts required. It's just slightly more if there's pregnancy and lactation. And this is a little hard to see, so I apologize for that, but it is found in both animal sources and plant sources. So you'll find that liver of all kinds is a pretty heavy source of a lot of vitamins and minerals specifically, because that is kind of an area in the body where things are stored more. And then spinach is a very good source. So we have our spinach in this recipe today. We'll also talk about spinach when we talk about vitamin K. Obviously, breakfast cereals, we talked about fortified grains. So kind of like our green leafy vegetables are usually a good source of folate. Citrus can be a good source. So it's in a variety of foods, which is mostly why people don't tend to be deficient in folate for the overall population. And then there's B12. So B12, a little different. More people are at risk for a deficiency of B12. So it is bound to protein in foods and it needs to be released before it's absorbed. So it is mostly bound to the protein in animal foods. It's important for development and function of our nervous system and our red blood cell development. So the groups at risk for deficiency: older adults, vegetarians, and vegans, and that's mostly because it's bound to protein mostly in the animal products. People have had gastric bypass surgery. Let me just see what that noise was. I just want to make sure my battery's not going low. Okay, perfect. So people post gastric surgery, and this is all kind of, and people who've been using things like proton pump inhibitors like omeprazole or pantoprazole, things like that for a longer period of time, and or metformin. So the reason is like to release that B12 that's bound to the protein, we need adequate acid in the stomach. So obviously if we're suppressing that with the medicines, older adults just tend to have a little less of that also in their system. So that's why it can be a little bit lower in certain populations. We kind of see our RDAs for that. So it's in micrograms, very small amounts, but still important in our bodies. We see again, the beef liver is a very good source. Our kind of some of the clams and oysters are good sources. Nutritional yeast. I don't know if anybody's ever used that, but it is it's yeast basically, but it is heavily fortified with B12 typically. So that is generally a very good source for people that are maybe vegetarian and vegan. Also fortified in a lot of like plant milks, things like that, cereals. And then, in smaller amounts in some of our other seafood. So B12, so it's typically recommended that it is supplemented in people that are vegetarian or vegan, or that population that's been on the proton pump inhibitors for a long time, and even potentially older adults. So it's typically in a multivitamin with minerals supplement. So that can be a reliable source. Also, some people just take it separately. So they have kind of the sublingual B12s, medicines that you can, or vitamins that you can get. And, excuse me. So if you're deciding to take it as a supplement, they usually take it once a week with those, like dissolvable ones. So that's something to talk to with your doctor as well, if it's something you're concerned about, because, they do sometimes have tests. Some people get like a supplemental amount from their doctors. Sometimes people get injections of it prescribed by the doctor. So it's definitely worth a conversation if it's something that you're feeling like you might be low in. All right, so let's talk about vitamin C a little bit. That's something that we've all heard about and are pretty familiar with. And the other B vitamins that I didn't really touch on are really found in a lot of different foods. So they're typically not much of a risk for inadequacy in people. So B12, the other B vitamins are really readily available. B12 is probably that one outlier that's just a little bit harder to get enough of or process enough of. So vitamin C, so we hear it's water soluble, right? So that's why I'm sure you've heard the stories of like when people would sail from Europe to this, the Americas, they would have sometimes problems with scurvy, right? So scurvy is when that like collagen is no longer properly connected. So they'd end up with like loose skin and like sores and all of those things, teeth falling out. Because we can't store it in the body. So they'd have to maybe pack some type of citrus with them for the journey. So vitamin C, also known as ascorbic acid, which you probably see in a lot of foods. Unfortunately, they seem to add it pretty regularly to foods to prevent discoloration. So for example, like applesauce will have ascorbic acid in it because it helps prevent that from browning, basically. It's an antioxidant. It helps with our immune systems. Again, that collagen synthesis, so that, it keeps our skin tight, keeping that elasticity in the skin. And then also important for iron absorption. So if we are needing to increase our levels of iron, taking some vitamin C rich foods with our iron rich foods can really help us absorb it. Really also great for if we're eating more plant-based and we're looking to try to get more of our iron out of those plant-based foods, pairing it with something high in vitamin C can be a really nice option. And our vitamin C rich foods we'll get to in a minute. So we have our required amounts. And if we're eating fruits and vegetables, it's pretty easy to get enough. It's more people that aren't really eating fruits and vegetables that can get into trouble with not having enough vitamin C. So we see right here, if we have a half cup of red pepper, we're already at 106% of our daily value. More than orange juice, right? That's interesting. And then we see like strawberries are a great source, pepper, other colors of peppers, broccoli, just a lot of fruits and veggies have a ton of vitamin C. So if we're having our 5 a day, we're definitely getting enough vitamin C. Great. Let me just give this a little stir and then we'll start talking about the fat soluble vitamins. So this is starting to caramelize nicely. So vitamin A is has two forms. So one is our kind of animal, it's called like provitamin A, also known as retinol, and that is found specifically in animal products. And I just complained to the company making Prime. Has anybody heard of the Prime drink? Like a hydration beverage? I'll get it out of the fridge to show you. So it looks like this. I complained to them about the lack of, my son convinced me to get this and I was like, oh, coconut water, first ingredient. I'm like, whatever, that's fine. And then I like looked at it more closely and it's got like 100% of preformed vitamin A in it. And we'll get into that a little bit more on why that's not a good thing. But it's also like not really a hydration beverage. So I wrote them an email. We'll see if they get back to me. I suggested they reformulate it to make it actually appropriate for what they're trying to advertise it as. But we'll get into why I was really most upset about the vitamin A piece of it.
They may send you a coupon, look out.
Yeah, right. Not yet. They may. So it's the retinol and then the carotenoids. So we're probably familiar with beta carotene, right? That's a pretty common term that we hear. So the carotenoids are found in our plant foods, typically those rich orange, dark yellow fruits and vegetables are typically high in the beta carotene. Deficiency in vitamin A is really uncommon in the US. They find it, it's a little bit more in like third world countries. And they've actually played around with like making like a golden rice. I don't know if anybody's heard of this, that has been kind of created in like, I guess, bread in a way that it's a richer vitamin A content rice that I think they've tried to introduce to some of the countries where rice is kind of their primary source of nutrition. But in the US, it's pretty uncommon to be low in vitamin A. It is important for our vision, specifically kind of that night vision, immune system support, cell growth, skin health. And really the focus should be on vitamin A from foods, not from supplements, as there is a risk of excess vitamin A intakes. So let's take a look at the recommendation here. So for adults, 900 micrograms is, that recommended dietary allowance, and definitely less for children. These are our sources. So again, our beef liver just has all the things. Not that I'm recommending people to eat beef liver, but just so you're aware of how much it has, like, and it's a ton of vitamin A in that. Not what we need to do per se. But we can get it, so it absorbs a little bit less from plant foods, but as you can see, I think it's like maybe a 30% rate of the absorption from the plant foods. But again, if we're having a nice variety of plant foods, we're going to meet our 100% daily value. That on top of the fact that it's in like dairy products, when you kind of look at your, if you ever have milk, it says vitamin A and D. So they do fortify cow's milk with both of those as well, even though it's also naturally in it. And then, some other animal products and different types of plant foods have some vitamin A. So the risk, there's So since it is fat soluble, we can take too much. There is at higher levels, it's a teratogen, so that's something that causes birth defects. So that's a little bit slightly higher, like maybe 4 times the daily value. There's more of a risk for that. So they definitely have pregnant women and women of childbearing age just kind of being aware of the amount that they're taking in and choosing supplements that have it from an animal or a plant source, more like the beta carotene source. Interestingly enough, they did do a study years ago with beta carotene supplements and seeing, I think they were trying to reduce lung cancer risk in smokers, and they actually found that beta carotene supplements increased their lung cancer risk. So that was kind of interesting and kind of made people rethink, maybe what people are supplementing with if they are smokers. Nobody quite knows why it did that, but it did. And then vitamin D, we've all heard vitamin D out there, right? So it's important for our immune function, our bone health, mood regulation, and we get it from sunlight, and then we can also get it from food sources. Actually, we're in the time of year that we can actually get it from sunlight. We just kind of moved into that closeness to the sun where we can actually absorb some. And the recommendation is always to apply sunscreen to the face, and then most people will say 10 minutes just kind of on our larger limbs, and then covering up or putting our sunscreen on is adequate. Our groups at risk for inadequacy: breastfed infants, people with obesity or post-gastric bypass, people with darker skin, and people with limited sun exposure. So definitely, and I'm sure some of you have maybe gotten your vitamin D levels checked. A lot of people do have low vitamin D levels. So I know a lot of times doctors have, people on a supplement, things like that to bring it up, because it is important for a lot of different things in our bodies. So our RDA, it used to be a little lower. They did increase it more recently. So for most adults, it's somewhere between 600 and 800 international units a day. Our food sources, seafood definitely has some vitamin D. Mushrooms, I think we talked, I don't know if y'all were on that call, but when we talked about if you have mushrooms, instead of putting yourself in the sunlight, you can actually put your mushrooms in the sunlight, and they actually absorb a ton of vitamin D, and then they're just this great little vitamin D supplemental food that you can eat, which I think is so cool. So if you flip them upside down so the gills are exposed, that's where the most surface area will be, you just put them on a tray, put them in the sunlight, and I think you only need to keep them out for like 20 minutes or something, and you'll get a nice boost of vitamin D from them. So get those mushrooms sunbathing a little bit. And then our milk is typically fortified, or plant milks are also fortified with vitamin D. Cereals are, any type of cereal that's got your list of vitamins on it would be fortified with it. And then, you can kind of look at the rest of the list, mostly the seafood and then our mushrooms. Great. Okay. And then vitamin E, we don't hear a ton about vitamin E. I know sometimes people put it on scars, but most people are getting enough, so we don't focus a whole lot on it, but definitely it is it is an antioxidant. It helps with our immune system, skin health, but again, deficiency is rare. And we have, the RDAs are for all adults anybody over 14, it's all the same. So it doesn't really change a whole lot other than lactation. And it's found in a lot of plant foods, which is great. Different nuts and seeds and fruits and veggies. So it's pretty easy to get enough of that into our day. All right. And then we have vitamin K. Vitamin K is I feel like we're starting to hear a little bit more about vitamin K. I don't know if, I have clients talking about vitamin K more than they have in the past, but important for blood clotting, also important for bone health. So I think that's obviously a big focus for a lot of people. Cardiovascular health, but deficiency is rare again in the US for K. Some people have to be super careful with it if they do have, if they're on medications to thin their blood. But most people kind of can just consume all their food sources that they like without really needing a supplement of it. We have our RDAs here. And then our food sources. So as you can see here, it is in a lot of different foods. We're using spinach today. Spinach is a really nice source, but look how much collard greens has. Super high percentages of vitamin K in collard greens and turnip greens, kale, and then kind of like our fish and other animal foods. Just some recipes as always, and the slides should be in your email. Great, so now let's wrap on this recipe. So we have our onions pretty caramelized at this point. All right, so we're gonna add our balsamic vinegar and we're gonna stir it continuously until this reduces down to a little bit of a syrup. Smells so good. I'm gonna turn up the heat just a little bit. And this type of a mixture, we're adding it to this, right? Or this reduced down balsamic vinegar with the onions, but you can add this to a lot of different things. You can keep this in the fridge and add it to salads. You could put it on like salmon or something like that. It's just a really nice flavor profile. All right. So that's heating. Unfortunately, this thing's a little on the slower side, so we're gonna let that. I'm gonna grab one thing out for my smoothies that I'm remembering that I forgot. It's going well, going nicely now. Get our lentils measured out. We're gonna do a cup of cooked. Actually, we could even do a little bit more. We might do a cup and a half. Okay. This is pretty much reduced down at this point. So I'm gonna turn off the heat. You can see the onions are nice and caramelized. All right, so now we're gonna add in our spinach and salt. It's just an eighth of a teaspoon of salt. It doesn't really need it if you don't want to add it. So we're just gonna keep adding the spinach until it wilts. And I put 4 ounces in the recipe. These containers are 5 ounces. So feel free to just use it all. I think this time I might actually use all of it too. Because I'm sure if you're familiar with how quickly spinach reduces down to almost nothing, it's not a ton of spinach that ends up in this recipe. And then we'll just add an 1/8 teaspoon of salt. Okay. And you could do this recipe too. I think collard greens would work really well with it. Or even kale. Okay, just about reduced down. It's fully wilted.
So quick question while you're doing that. Why do you choose a black lentil for this recipe? Like what's the difference from like the other colors is
Yeah, I mean, so there are different kind of phytonutrients giving it that like darker, like that black color. I think it's nice because I just like the texture of it, but you can also use the green lentils in this recipe. Yeah, it's more of like a texture thing that they hold their form a little bit better. And I
I
just,
guess this might be kind of aesthetics too, that it stands
Uh-huh.
out from the green.
Yeah, it looks pretty. But they are a little bit like, they're not as easy to find. So the green lentils would work just as well. The black
someone was asking how easy is it to find the black ones?
Yeah, they're a little harder to find. I did buy like maybe 2 years ago, like a bigger bag on Amazon that I've just been like working through. So, a little bit of those goes a long way and they seem to have held up even though they're like 2 years old. So,
I think Harvest Market and Hockessin might have black ones. They seem to have
that would be
all
great.
the colors.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and if you could come across like a store that sells like the bulk, maybe you could just buy a smaller amount in the bulk aisles of, maybe like that location or even like I don't know if Whole Foods still has a bulk aisle. But yeah, you might be able to find it. And it's just, you know, I do think it is pretty. Let me show you what it looks like a little bit more up close. I can lift up my giant heavy pan. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see background, but yeah, but like the green labels would work just as well. Great. Well, I hope you get to try that because that's probably one of the favorite recipes I've made in this class series. Now we're going to move on to our mango carrot smoothie. So I wanted to really just get a lot of nutrition in one shake, and this seemed to be a really nice way to do it. So I started with, I just kind of I steamed some carrots because trying to blend up, unless you have a really good blender, it's not going to work well to blend up a raw carrot. So I have one medium carrot, which actually has 100% of our daily value of vitamin A, the beta carotene kind of vitamin A. And then we're going to do 1 cup of frozen mango. And frozen mango is a really nice source of vitamin C. Mango in general doesn't have to be frozen. Now, the first time I made this, I also used frozen strawberries, but it ended up being just really thick. So I've decided to use fresh strawberries because they're actually like pretty decent right now. So I'm going to do a 1/2 cup of fresh strawberries. Okay. Then we're going to pop in 2 tablespoons of rolled oats. I think I've showed you before that I like to just blend them and keep them in a little container ahead just to add to smoothies. Just adds a little bit of fiber, a little bit of texture, like kind of thickens it up a little bit. And then we're going to do a tablespoon of chia seeds. So a tablespoon of chia seeds has about 5 grams of fiber. It's a really nice way to kind of get some fiber into a shake. Also has some plant-based omega-3 fatty acids, and a little bit of protein. Now, if you're somebody that is kind of going through having difficulty eating, maybe treatment or your doctor said like you need more protein, you could always add some protein powder to this mix. And I usually recommend maybe like a 1/2 scoop. People don't generally need that full scoop because we're adding in, you figure you're getting protein from the chia seeds, we're getting some protein from the rolled oats, and then you're going to get protein from your soy milk. So you're still getting like, if you added a 1/2 scoop, which typically has 10 grams of protein, you're still going to get in the low 20s in terms of grams of protein if you just add a 1/2 scoop of protein powder. All right. Then I'm also, it doesn't look like I added date. I did put a date in this and I should have put that on the recipe. So mark that down that it does have a date in it, and the date just really helped to just give it a nice little sweet pop. I really like adding dates into smoothies. And then I'm going to do 10 ounces of soy milk. So 8 is a little low for this recipe just because it was pretty thick. So I felt like 10 was a sweet spot. And you can use any type of milk. You don't have to use the soy milk. I just like to use it in smoothies just because it has a little bit of protein. And if you're using a plant milk, it's pretty much our highest one for protein. And then we always talk about like 1 to 2 servings of soy a day. It can fit nicely into a somebody's diet. So we're gonna do 10 ounces of that. You could also use like a low fat cow's milk. But I just love how pretty this ends up being. I'm just gonna mute myself so you don't have to hear my blender going. All right, we have a nice pretty color. Nice high fiber, tasty smoothie. High fiber, high vitamin. All right. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I noticed you were using salt in that, and is there, maybe it was iodized salt? Is
Mhm.
there a good source of iodine? Is it seafood only, pretty much?
So seaweed is actually a really good source. So like the nori seaweed that goes on like the sushi wraps that you might be familiar with. So that can be something nice to just snack on if you're looking to get a little bit more iodine. I usually recommend, that as an option. Yeah, and then it is in some seafood. Sometimes it's in dairy, depending on what they're cleaning, like the machines with, but we don't ever really know that. So I don't know that dairy's always a reliable source. So mostly kind of like seaweed, seafood, and then iodized salt, probably. Obviously, we don't want to use a ton of iodized salt, but if we're kind of picking between like sea salt and iodized salt when we're cooking, and we know we need a little bit of iodine, I would lean more towards the iodized salt.
Okay.
So I have a question from someone who couldn't be here today, but she wanted me to ask you about like what you thought about herbal infusions to get vitamins. So taking some herbs, soaking them, overnight in a liquid. I don't know if she means an oil or just a water, and using that to extract vitamins and minerals. So is that a good way to get them, or any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that's necessary just because it's in so many of our plant foods. Um, so I haven't heard of that being specifically used for that. I've kind of heard that maybe more being like more of a medicinal use of herbs, to have certain things happen when we're consuming them. Um, so I would really just recommend like of eating the rainbow of fruits and veggies, and that usually pretty much covers the bases for the vitamins specifically. But if people are doing that, I would recommend, just double checking that whatever we're doing isn't going to interfere with any like medications that we might be taking.
Thank you.
Mhm.
You were talking about vitamin D.